Hi, friend. Niklas here from Your Audio Solutions. Hope you are doing well and welcome to today's episode. On the show today, we have Drew Silverstein, who is the co founder and CEO of Ampere Music. And Ampere Music is a tool based on AI that empowers anyone to create unique and professional music instantly. Super cool tool and can be really beneficial for people who want to have music for their videos. Maybe you have a YouTube channel, podcast, whatever, or any other application, but you might not know, sorry, how to make music, or you don't have the money to hire someone else to do it for you. So this tool is perfect for you. Now, having a tool like artificial intelligence that makes music making easier is obviously super valuable, but it's also very disruptive. For example, for industries that rely on composers for library music, for example. However, technology will always make things easier, and why should the music industry be immune to that when in fact it never has? Just look back, just go back to the 80s synthesizers, for example. That's a very obvious and easy example to make, but it's a super interesting conversation. The impact of AI, which jobs will be lost, which jobs can be gained, which things can we automate to make more creative decisions or be more creative in our everyday as composers or engineers or whatever you are. So it's a super interesting conversation. And I'm very happy to have with Drew, who's a super intelligent man, and I hope you will like this conversation as well. Also, feel free to leave a comment below letting me know your thoughts on AI and the impact of AI in music and music production and sound engineering and so forth. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Now, do you want exclusive access to interviews before the public? Do you want to be a part of the conversation? Do you want to be able to ask questions to up and coming guests or be a part of private live streams and so forth? Then all you have to do is join the Audio Tribe. There's a link to it in the description below. Just enter your name and email address and you have joined the Audio Tribe. It's free, of course, super simple. Lots of cool stuff coming your way. And as we grow to more and more people, the more cool stuff we can do together. So I'd love to see you there. Also, feel free to not join, but to subscribe to the YouTube channel or Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you are listening and watching this show. I'd love to see you there. And if you help subscribe, the more guests I can bring on, the cooler stuff we can do, and more cool stuff I can do for you guys who are watching and supporting the channel. So I'd love to see you subscribe. But that's it. Let's get into the interview with Drew Silverstein. Drew, awesome to have you here. Part two-ish. uh, I actually like to start our conversation with knowing how, maybe why you made a transition from, because I know you were a composer for films and stuff, but why you transitioned from that to basically starting your own competitor, I guess you can call it, right?
Oh yeah, kind of. So there are two things. One, as a film composer, my co-founders and I recognized how much technology helped us be more efficient and more effective and express our creativity more clearly in our job. And so we've always used the most bleeding edge technology to be as good as we can at our profession. And so from a creative perspective, an artistic perspective, as technology advances, we get better at our job. At the same time, and we work with so many directors and editors that would say to us, look, we love working with you and we have time and budget to focus on music as an artistic part of our process. But then they'd say, for a lot of the content we create, we have neither of those two ingredients, time nor budget. And so they'd ask us, could you do us a favor and compose the music for this project? And there's only so many favors we could do. So eventually we said, look, what if we could build a creative AI that gives you the same collaborative experience of working with us within the time and economic framework that you need? And they jumped at it. And so with that inspiration, not only the creative and technological inspiration, but the business use case, most importantly, we started to build Ampere with the goal of enabling anyone around the world to be able to express themselves creatively through music, regardless of their background, expertise, or access to resources.
I mean, I was watching your TED Talk. It was really good, and I can recommend people to check it. And you talked about, and this is a real fear amongst creatives, musicians, artists, whatever, and that is that their profession or skill set might be obsolete, right? And I've been thinking a lot about that because music, or actually, why should music be protected from technological advancement that any other industry is having? Like any other industry, you might lose your job because AI or whatever can do it more efficient, right? So how would you encourage people to think about it rather than being, oh, I hate AI, or whatever technology, Yeah, how would
Sure.
you, encourage people to think and prepare and take advantage of?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is and frankly, the most important thing is that we all share an understanding of the facts. What's possible, what's not, what's real, what's fake, etc. Hollywood does us no favors by making everything in AI's or making everyone's kind of internalization of that be like Terminator Skynet, right? It's the end of the world. And that's very far from the truth. And so whether or not people are going to agree with me in my argument, what we hopefully can share is a set of common facts, right? And from there we can have an intelligent argument. And for that, I think there's a couple historical trends that I find compelling. One, and I'll talk to music, but it's applicable in any industry, is that technology has always helped us express our ideas. And as technology advances, we're able to express our ideas more quickly, with less knowledge required, and with less financial investment required, right? So from the days of Bach, when it was pen and paper, and you had to know everything, and to afford to do it, you had a state or a church sponsor, right? To the mid-1900s, when it was analog recording, and you could do more, know less, and invest less, right? To the 80s with the synthesizer, to the 90s with the onset of digital music, today with mobile. Each one of these technological advancements lowers the time investment required and the economic cost of learning how to express yourself creatively. And also, at each one of these inflection points, from a local perspective, everyone thinks the world's going to end. Synthesizers were gonna kill the orchestra. Recorded music was going to kill. Analog tape was going to kill live music. All of these things. And when we see that's in no way the truth. What is true is that as technology advances, the way we make music and the way we changes. And that's really the difference between a job and a career. Right? A job is a set of tasks that we complete. Career is our ability to deliver value to others over time. And so what I'll tell people is your job, or the set of tasks we complete to make music, will not exist in 5 or 10 years. In the same way that the job you used to do 5 or 10 years ago does not exist today. However, your career has every reason to exist in the future as it does today, as it did in the past. Because the way we do things will always change. But the core goal of being able to make music and to help others, whether it's a musical or a standalone piece of music, or music within a piece of media content or something else, that still exists. And so the worst thing you can do is bury your head in the sand and say, none of this counts, none of this is happening, it's not applicable to me, I'm ignoring it, right? Because that's when in essence, the times can pass you by.
Right.
And we all love, going and using perhaps not the most bleeding edge technology to do things, and that's great. But from a professional perspective, it's critically important to be aware and knowledgeable about what current techniques are, what current opportunities are, what current technologies are, and then to make an educated decision of whether or not to use them, when and how and why. So, when people say, look, this is going to destroy the end of the world, this is putting every musician out of business, it's not necessarily true. Certainly, when technology advances, and so we'll talk in music, AI music, it has the most immediate threat to the bottom of the pyramid, right? The stock music that goes, behind content where it's really valued as functional music, not as artistic music, right? And that is being rapidly attacked and will soon become largely the domain of computer music because the value prop makes sense. And so for those people who currently make their bread and butter in that part of the industry, they're going to have to move upstream and up. But for those who are creating artistic music, music that's valued for the collaboration and human creative process that goes into making it, that will never be replaced by AI music because the value prop is such that humans value making art together. Humans making art for humans, and yes, we use technology to do that. And I hope that Ampere is a part of every artistic creation, as part of the tool set. But it won't displace the creative efforts and the people who are making that music. And again, this argument is equally applicable in nearly any industry, right? If you just changed out terminology for agriculture, for medicine, for whatever it might be. But in music, it's quite applicable because of what we do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's super interesting because I think maybe because the whole technology moves fast, or move forward so fast, quickly, that it can maybe feel a bit overwhelming, because this is my perception of musicians, artists, that they might not be familiar with, how do I add value? What does that mean? Like, I thought it was enough me making cool songs, So, what would you say being added value the artists or engineers, whatever, can bring to the music industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing is to understand. First of all, if you're making music for yourself,
Sure.
right, you are your own boss, right? And so you do whatever you want. If you are making music for others, then you have to understand why people listen to or purchase your music. Is it because they like you as the artist? They like your story? Is it because they have a piece of a video clip that just needs music behind it and they don't care where they get it from or how it works? They just need to do something. And depending on what that value prop is and that use case is, you optimize for that. And because I argue very strongly that music that's valued for the human artistry is the most defensible against technological encroachment. I strongly encourage anyone who's a professional music maker, someone hoping to or currently being paid in these industries, to find out and seek out ways where their music is valued artistically. Right. And it can be a number of manners, but if you do that, then you are inherently insulating yourself from the pressures of technology, much more so than if you are directly competing with something that inevitably will be faster, more affordable for buyers, and equal to, from a quality perspective, what you can do. And that's just not a winning battle that you can make.
Right. But do you think, looking or valuing library music as the lowest tier, is that a correct assessment, or do you get a lot of pushback on that too? I mean, I guess you get pushback on everything. Maybe not everything, but a lot. What's your not defense, but
I would say it's not that it's the. Let me say it this way: being the lowest tier doesn't necessarily equate to its value, right? I mean, there's great, production music. It can be incredible. So the fact that it's utilized in that way doesn't undermine the creative value that went into it. But what I think we often get into, a misinformed argument over is there's a difference between what we as the creator value what we've made and what the ultimate buyer values. And if we're selling something, it matters less what we think and more what they think, because they're the ones paying the money. And so that's where there's a difference between functional music and artistic music. Functional music, someone cares about the music's use case but doesn't care how it was made. And artistic music, it's the opposite. They care about how it was made, less about the use case. Functional music is music behind a Facebook video. Artistic music is Taylor Swift or John Williams scoring Star Wars, right? And when I talk about kind of the pyramid, really it's in some ways, yes, there's kind of the economic part, but it's also just like from a pure volume perspective, there's way more functional music in the world than there is artistic music. Sure. You think about all the music you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis, and we'll at least talk in pre-COVID times, right? Things on the radio, artistic. Movies, artistic. Any advertisement, any social media thing, all of these kind of anything you're hearing while walking, that's functional. It's functional usage. And so there's just so much more of it from a volume perspective that from a market size, in some ways it's massive, and oftentimes sort of from a hidden perspective, because no one really thinks about all of these incredibly diverse use cases of functional music. And so it's not to say that one's worth more intrinsically, but from a business perspective, one is artistic music is the purview solely of people for that reason that I mentioned before, even though we use technology in the making of it. And the other, functional music, historically was solely the domain of humans, but now more and more is seeing direct competition from AI-generated music, and that's just oftentimes not a battle that people can win, frankly. And whether it's today or it's in 100 years, right? 100 years from now, AI-generated music will be old hat. It'll be like ancient technology, and the world will have changed, and we'll look back and have a historical lens to it, and we can debate whether it was a good or a bad thing, but it will have happened. Right, and so the question is not if, it's when, and if the question is when, then it's an inevitability, and if that's the case, we should think about what this means for us and how we prepare for it, and make sure that we as a human society and a creative class can be resilient in the face of changing market conditions.
Right, that's super interesting, man. But something I'm curious about is you're very well spoken. You feel like you give a lot of thought. You've given a lot of thought on this topic, right? So I mean, did you? What's your background a bit before you? Obviously, you compose music, but did you study coding? Did you study technology? What's your background? Because I feel like there's a lot of stuff there that elevated you to where you are now.
Thank you. So I'm not an engineer by any stretch. I can look at code and sort of understand it, but I'm not a software engineer whatsoever. I went to school. I studied Italian and music composition. I was a film composer for a little bit during that period. I was also a proprietary options trader. At one point I went and got an MBA at Columbia, so to kind of get a more solid business grounding in the fundamentals. But I think more than anything, in terms of being able to speak about this topic, I've just thought about it a lot. I read a lot. I think about it, and I practice and refine kind of my argument. And I think importantly, I listen to others. Right, because everything I say is not going to be good or right, or even if I believe it, someone else might not, and that's okay. What's critical is that I don't just put my head, say like this is what it is and this is the world. It's well, how do people react to this, and what are the fallacies in something I might be saying, and what has weight? And again, my goal is not necessarily to to be right, but my goal is to make a sound argument. That while someone might disagree with me, someone can at least say, yes, I disagree with you, but the facts you're using are supported and your argument is sound. right? And then that takes time. And then at the same time, Amper's 6 years old. I've been doing this a lot.
Right.
And so I have a lot of practice speaking on this topic. And there's very few things that someone asks that I haven't, had the opportunity to think about.
Right.
So if you ask me, what do I think about, theoretical physics in the year of 2054, like I'm going to have less of an eloquent response because it's not, but because this is kind of a domain that I've steeped myself in, I've got the benefit of a considerable amount of thought and time and practice to be able to speak to.
Makes sense. But I mean, so you started Ampere 6 years ago. What was the process of starting Ampere? I mean, because you said you're not a coder, so did you just said I have an idea, let me find the people who are experts in this field? Is that how you went on about it, or?
Yeah, well, interestingly, so my two co-founders, Sam Estes and Michael Hobie, who are also very, very talented composers and sound designers in our film music world, and what we realized, we worked together closely, given kind of how we came to know each other, and we realized, look, we can accomplish this from an artistic perspective. But what we said from the beginning is, AI music, it's not a data science problem, right? It's not a problem where there's a right answer. And oftentimes data science and machine learning is all about finding what is the right answer to this problem. Challenge in music is there is no right answer. It's entirely subjective. You can think something about a piece of music. I can think something. We're both correct. You can change your opinion. You're still correct. And that's the beauty and the frustration of the creative world. So what we said is it's not a data science problem that happens to be solving a problem in the creative domain. It is a creativity problem that will use data science as a tool to solve. And because of that, we approach this very much from an artistic and musical perspective. And so, in fact, the original, proof of concept for the proof of concept, call it the MMMVP, the minimum viable product, which is say it wasn't a viable product, but it was a proof of concept. It was a Google spreadsheet. It was tables. It was things that would take forever to run, and we'd have to translate what that meant from some version of binary into sheet music and play it at a piano and figure out, and very iterative, but it was enough for us to from a technological perspective to address enough of the key hypotheses that needed to be true in order for this to have a chance.
Right.
Could we do this? Could it be fast enough? Could there be enough control? Could the quality be good enough? And none of the answers were it is good enough now in any of these things, but we were able to early on, kind of following that lean startup methodology, say what are the things that we must have as truths in order to have a shot at this, and we addressed them. And because we were thinking about this more creatively and musically, the engineering side wasn't as much of a factor in us determining could this be accomplished. We assumed that the engineering side could be addressed. The problem was the creative side. And then once we addressed that, the best thing we did is surround ourselves by brilliant people as quickly as possible. Our team at Ampere is chock full of composers and engineers and musicians and data scientists and people who are truly brilliant. But think about the world and think about this problem in the similar vein.
Right.
And I think one of the most important roles of a CEO is hire the best people you can, make sure there's a very clear North Star, and stay out of the way.
Yeah.
And let brilliant people do their thing. And I think we've seen that be effective, given the fact that Ampere's the best AI music technology in the world by a long shot, frankly.
Right. But are you able to I mean, and you said you're not involved in the coding per se, but are you able to give us sort of the overview of how it works behind the scenes? Like,
sure.
That would be cool.
Totally. So there's a couple steps of the process by which Ampere makes music. We've got to compose the music, and then we've got to produce the music, and those are two very distinct things. And so to compose the music, what we have are a set of data sets. We build our own data. And the reason for that is there's just no clean, good, structured public data on our space.
Mm-hmm.
It's been one of the biggest limiting factors. And so we have defined by hand over 6 years, thousands and thousands of combinations of genres and moods and styles, and what are the things that are just so key identifiers of a thing. So rock music has guitars, right? Hip hop music has beats. But I'm being simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, how do we, in essence, create a music theory engine, an orchestration engine, instrumentation engine, that's equivalent to a PhD grad, in music. And so those are just kind of fundamental building blocks. Ultimately, what happens is via our user interface on Score or via the API, we are helping users pick out the data set that they want to use to run through kind of the composition process. We call the data sets descriptors. And what happens is you pick a descriptor, and that runs through kind of the composition engine, and it spits out a version of sheet music. It's not quite sheet music because they don't need it to be visualized as such, but it's written notation in a way. And that's the piece of music. It's been created as a lead sheet, then orchestrated and fleshed out, and all the holes filled in, so to speak. And then we've got to turn that into audio. And so to do that, we've also created the world's largest sample library, where we record every instrument note by note, thousands and thousands of times. I think we've got over 10,000 unique sampled instruments at this point. It's incredible. And it's all structured. That entire sample library is structured as a data set, which is critical because there are a lot of commercial sample libraries available, but they're, in no way are they easily manipulatable into something that data science can take advantage of. They're certainly company they're inconsistent. Even within a company, library to library, there's not necessarily enough commonality.
Right.
And so we take this, we take the written piece of music, and then we run it through our performance engine, our rendering engine, and that's what performs the music and stitches together thousands and thousands of audio files into something that should be a seamless recording. And we mix it, we do post-production, mastering, et cetera, and deliver it to you. And what's incredible is all that happens in a matter of seconds. From nothing to everything. Right now we're at about 8 to 15x faster than real time. From super nuts, right? So if you ask for a minute's worth of music to be composed from scratch, right, it's going to take anywhere from 3 or 4 to 7 or 8 seconds, right? And the whole process happens in the cloud, and then you've got it.
I mean, it's super cool, honestly. So all the samples. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it works, obviously, but I'm just thinking as you're speaking. But it's cool. I mean, knowing basically nothing about AI, like on a technical level, it's cool that you can just do that, and so and then it connects with the samples you have, and then because I tried Ampere, the website to make a song, or for it to make me a song. I mean, it is cool, honestly.
Thank you. We agree.
Yeah. But so there's no risk of creating the same song twice, or?
I mean, the risk is greater than zero, and less than the chance of like a meteor hitting New York City tomorrow, right? It is greater than zero, but it's infinitesimally small because there are so many, nested and recursive decisions that get made. If you let's say let's say there's 5,000 unique decisions that are made in a piece of music, right? And so what's 5,000 factorial, right? It's how many. It's just a massive number, and so yes. And as Ampere gets more complicated and the logic gets deeper, right? Those decisions are not only growing in number but growing in depth, and so. Now, at the same time, if you want to make something the same, you can, because you can control the random seeds that are used in different areas of the process, so that there is a deterministic capability, because that's important. Sometimes you want to be able to reproduce things, or if you're collaborating and with the AI and saying, "Well, I like this, but change that," right? What you're not saying is re-roll the dice for the entire thing. You're just saying, "Well, I want to change the bass line, or I want to add a new instrument, or I want to change the spotting notes, or the tempo, or the instrument, whatever it might be." But keep everything else the same, which is very much reflective of how a human-to-human creative collaboration might be.
Right. But in terms of mixing and mastering, you said, does that happen too in the? So when you listen to the file back, is it then mixed and mastered, or?
Yep. So the entire,
Right.
one of the things that's been really cool to see, but massively challenging, is that Ampere does all of it. Ampere is a full, to my knowledge, the only kind of full stack, so to speak, AI engine. Right? It's not. It composes, it performs, it mixes, it masters, it does all of these things, and it has to, because if it doesn't, we're not going to end up. Amper's not going to be able to create professional quality music, and if it can't do can't create music that's of a professional quality quickly. And providing a maximum amount of control, then it's not an actual solution on a commercial perspective. It's just a cool toy or a cool field of research. You've got to nail every aspect of the stack to an incredibly high degree in order to have something that people will pay money for. And it's very fulfilling when we see that we can do all of these things well, because you can also take pieces of it and break it off and productize it in different ways. But ultimately, we aim to be the holy grail of music, which is, or of AI music, which is, can we have a full stack end-to-end tool that, depending on someone's our musical goals, can do everything and can take very minimal information and give you a full piece of music, or it can help here and there with different pieces. It can be an orchestration engine. It can be a writer's block tool. It can it can help you get ideas to get started. It can write the new bass line. It can do all sorts of things. And for musicians, you might only want to use it for certain areas, right? You might use it 4% of your project. For a non-musical video editor, you might use it for 99.9%. And that's the beauty of the system. It's so full stack, and it's also so microservice structured in a way, even though architecturally it's not. But from a practical perspective, it is, that you can use different parts of Ampere technology depending on what you want, without having to only have one way to use a technology and to be shoehorned into one workflow every time.
Right. It's very interesting. But so, do you think it will be able to do a voice at some point, or would it just be one voice for every project?
Yeah. So we do vocals now, but I kind of think of them as a cappella style vocals, right? Like do's, das, ahs, etc. And we can do this really well. Doing singer-songwriter lyrics is incredibly difficult on a small, number of voices, right? You can do massive, big Carmina Burana choir can be done really effectively well, and there are sample library companies that do that well. But convincingly doing an AI singing one thing is massively different, and there are massively difficult. There are companies whose sole area of research is just that, right? And it's much more difficult than speech, because speech, yes, it's polyphonic, and there's there are tone changes, but it's limited. Whereas the voice is the most complex instrument known, and it's incredibly difficult to make a convincing synthetic vocal reproduction, but also then to be able to change things and to be able to go back and edit. So yes, it's possible. It's an area we think about. It's not something we've spent a ton of research resources on because of kind of the nature of what we focus on from a product roadmap. So it will be done. Whether or not we're the ones to do it, yet to be seen. But it's certainly capable. It's just a matter, someone's going to have to really tackle that problem as their core goal.
Right. And I mean, having a voice, obviously one of the problems could be that it sounds the same on each song, right? So it would have to be, I don't know what you call it, but it would have to be a different voice each time, right?
Yeah. Sure. and again, that goes to performance, right? You want to have the same singer sing the same thing every time on every song, and so that goes into building the right data and being able to grow your data set both manually, but also with ML and in an automated fashion, so that it can be of the moment and specific to each song or each project. Because if it's the same thing over and over again, cool research project, cool paper, cool presentation that'll get headlines, but not necessarily a practical commercial solution.
Right. I mean, something when you said early in the interview was functional music versus artistic music. I think you call it. I mean, could one make the argument that today's hit songs, whatever, like top 10, to a large degree sounds like functional music? You know what I mean? Without sounding lame.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid thought. I would argue that it is not function music because there's a difference between what it sounds like and correct me if I'm wrong. What I assume you're saying is it doesn't sound like it's as deeply artistic from a quality perspective and as well as the Beatles, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
It's more formulaic, et cetera, right? And whether that's true or not, and you'll find people obviously on both sides of that argument, what's important is why we value that music, right? And it's artistic music because what we value is that this singer wrote that song and created it and worked with this producer and made it, and I care about the whole picture, and I'm listening and I listen to it and I like it for music's sake, right? Because it's about the music. Whereas if it were more functionally valued, we wouldn't care about that as much. We would care about, well, what does it accomplish, right? Does it support the video that it's behind? Does it make this podcast more effective? And those, but I don't really care who made it and why it was done. It's just, it is what it is. And so, again, there's a difference between what one might think of as the quality or the artistry of a piece of music and the artistic or functional value of that music. And different people can value the same piece of music on functionally or artistically. The same person can change that value depending on valuation, so to speak, depending on what they're using it for, right? So it might be song by Taylor Swift might be valued artistically if when it's being listened to on the radio, but if someone's just saying, well, I want to put a song behind a video and I want to use this song, well, then it's a functional value, right? And so the same person can value each piece of music differently depending on the circumstance.
Right.
And that's, I think one of the things that makes music so wonderful as a field, but it also makes the ability to have these arguments a little bit difficult because there's no permanent definition or standard of anything, right? The same piece of music can be viewed differently depending on what the use case is, depending on who's looking at it, depending on who likes it, etc. And so that's why it's so important that we have core truths that we agree on, or even just core definitions, right? And not to say that my definitions should be the standard for the world. They're the definitions that I use. And if we're at least sharing the same common language around how we discuss these things, then we can have this debate, because so much of it also is just philosophical, right? There are plenty of differing opinions that are equally valid depending on your philosophy, but there are also plenty of opinions that are equally invalid because they're based on false logic or assumptions that aren't facts. And as the saying goes, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not to your own facts.
Yeah.
And that's what's important in this conversation, in the debate around technology and music, is that we are clear what is a fact, what is an opinion, what is an argument, what is a truth, and as long as we're clear about those things, then we can have a really, really powerful and fascinating debate and argument about it, where the goal is not even to win, but to advance our understanding and perspective on the topic.
Definitely, man. Definitely. But do you think Ampere can climb the value ladder, so to speak, or the tier ladder, and eventually, I mean, yeah, what do you think? Yeah, what's the limit? I guess there's no limit, but where do you see yourself going?
Yeah, to quote my high school calculus teacher, the limit does not exist, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's the question is not of capability, right? The capability of AI music and of Ampere is infinite. It can already create music that's indistinguishable from artistically created and valued music, right? What's the limiting factor, so to speak, is the use case. So yes, I expect, in the same way that nearly every professional musician today utilizes, well, every musician uses technology in some way. And if you say, well, I just use a guitar, or I sing, or I just use my voice, well, your voice is a technology and a guitar is a technology. They're old technologies, but they're equally useful. But as we adapt and start using newer computer, DAWs or mobile recording, etc., I expect that at some point soon, AI music will become a tool that everyone uses just as standard fare. And so it's not really a question of how high can Ampere go in terms of competing with every part of the industry, but how quickly can it become an effective creative tool in every part of the industry. And that's just limited by commercial adoption, our ability to productize the technology well, to advance the technology, and to invest in the right areas. And our goal at Ampere is to be involved in the creation of every piece of music around the world. And again, that might be Ampere was involved 1% or 100%. But that's and that's exciting because that's a really, really massive goal, right? Think of how much music is made every year, and think when the bar and the threshold of creating music gets lowered so much because of the technology like Ampere, then it means billions and billions of pieces of music are created every year with Ampere's involvement, which is why I previously said I think this is the greatest creative revolution in the history of music, because all of a sudden we're saying one technology or one core advancement all of a sudden unlocks so much more creative expression for billions and billions of people, and that's just an amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's exciting, and I mean, working with Ampere and founding it like you guys, that's an exciting thing. I mean, there's so many cool things happening in music technology. I mean, do you guys get any pushback from labels, like people who? Because I mean, that as much as me is the music industry has always been very slow, anti-tech, right? I mean, just look at what's it called? Like the early file sharing sites. Sure. I mean, that was a perfect example of, a technology. If it would have been adopted, they might have earned more money, which is what they want to do. Yeah. So, have you got any pushback from the industry at all, like the music labels?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, so much. So yes, and I think a lot of the pushback that we get when it's made with a full understanding is valid. Not everyone's going to agree. There's a lot of pushback that we get that's based on, baloney, and so that is less valid because it's just not a logical argument. That's why so much of our goal, and the work that I do personally, is not to try to convince someone that we're right, but it's to remove the opaqueness and replace it with transparency about what we're about and what technology is about. Because, if all you do is think, well, this thing is going to replace musicians and it's going to put every composer out of business and every musician out of business, and you're going to hate this thing. And I would too, right? I mean, I'm a composer at heart. But if you start understanding, if you go beyond the headline, which is oftentimes a headline, a catchy headline so that you'll click the thing and read the article, what you see is that that's not necessarily the case, that it's truly a useful tool in so many different ways. And once we're there and we can understand how and why it's useful, then the question and the argument is, well, how do we use this well? How do we take advantage of this? And not, is it a good or a bad thing because it exists. And so going, to the labels conversation, obviously labels, one of their core jobs is to promote and protect and create opportunities for artists. And so if something is perceived as a threat to artists, then inherently labels are going to be defensive to that, which to your kind of, your example of kind of early streaming and early file sharing. So once we're able to then show that this is not a direct competitor, or it doesn't have to be a direct competitor to artists, but can be a superpower for them, then all of a sudden we're able to have a conversation around positive use case as opposed to who's right and who's wrong, and we're never going to agree.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it feels like a label should embrace it, because I guess from a label's perspective, if they can make cheaper music, which they would be with Ampere, for example, that they would embrace it. I would assume.
Well, and typically when you think cheaper, I think of more cost effective.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right, and look, that's the story of technological advancement. How much does it cost to make did it cost to make a 10-song album 30 years ago? How much, whatever thousands of dollars in studio time. Now you can have a kid with an iPhone in their bedroom who can make that same 10-song album for no additional cost because they bought the phone, right? And they can know way less because they've got all these digital tools at their fingertips. And so again, the advancement of technology into the sphere of artificial intelligence and computer generated music just makes those financial capability and time investments so much less, which means so many more people can express themselves creatively through music easier, quicker, and more affordably than ever before.
Yeah, definitely. But I'd love to, because you mentioned books before, like you read a lot. Could you recommend any of your favorite books that has had the biggest impact on you?
Sure. There's a couple areas, I guess, of literature that I like to read. I'm very much into nonfiction, and some things are business books, some things are pleasure. Books like How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen, right? It's just to me it was an incredibly effective argument and piece of literature that say what's important to you in life and how do you think about. And you've got the Last Lecture, right, by Randy Pausch, which is just an amazing amazing book. So from kind of a personal development perspective, those have been really critical to me.
Yeah, because I love those sort of books as well. That's the main books I read as well. So I love those suggestions.
Totally. And then look, there are I love military history, and so
cool.
And memoirs, and so that's a a field that I just love reading about, and so all sorts of things.
Do you have any suggestions from any of those that part of literature?
Well, there's one called Red Notice, which I read recently. It's by a guy named Bill Browder, and it's he's an investor into Russia, or he's a hedge fund investor in Russia, and it kind of goes through this his true story journey of investing in the corruption and the politics, and it actually you see where there's different stories that we've read in the news about kind of political competition between the U.S. and Russia, and this actually provides a lot of context and background for why things were what they were. Cool. So that was cool. Then there's an incredible, I don't know if it was a biography, an autobiography of Shimon Peres, and he's a former president of Israel. I think it's like what was the name of his? It's No Dream. Something. I'll think of the name. Actually, No Room, Small Dreams. That's what it was. An autobiography. I just looked it up real quickly, and it's crazy. This guy's around at the founding of the state of Israel. He's talking about the founding of the nation and all through the 40 years, 50 years that he lived, post that founding and the stories. And what was crazy is to think, when he died, someone said the next day was the first day that the state of Israel existed without one of its founders.
Wow.
Imagine if you're in the U.S. and it's like all the founding fathers have just died. What's that next day like? And like that, you're fully in the next generation. It's just fascinating to hear. And he's got an incredible life story and such a dedication to public service and the things he believes in. So I found that really, really moving and inspiring.
Awesome, man. I mean, how do you take that information and apply it to your own life? Do you try to do that, or it's just purely pleasure?
No. I think having an understanding of why this matters to me and how I apply it is important. Some of it is, just for like Shimon Peres as an example, right? There's no business lesson in there necessarily, and I'm not going to be like, oh, well, that means I should invest in this area of our company over this. But what I think is so important is developing a moral and philosophical and ethical framework for decision making, and for understanding what are the things that I value and why, and being exposed to different perspectives can help me make hopefully the most informed prioritization in my life. And so that's critical. Then there are stories. Certainly there are times there are things I'll read that I just read for pure pleasure, right? Where it's like I just want to read the story of some amazing special forces soldier who did an incredible thing, lived to tell about it, and like I want to go on that journey with them. That's just fantasy, and I love getting into that world. But a lot of the stuff that I'm reading, whether it's online or a book. I'm trying to figure out what are the lessons that I can draw out of that for my decision-making framework, for the structuring of my values, and either to support them or to challenge them, to better inform kind of what I know and what I think about the world, and all of that. The whole goal ultimately is to be as educated as possible in the areas that I care about, but also to be as to know when I'm uneducated or not educated enough in other areas to know who to look to and who to talk to. It's I think I'll be the first to admit I know a lot about a few things and a little about a lot of things. But knowing what my limits are and where I want to invest in my own knowledge is critical. I think it's an important lesson for everyone because we never know enough, and if we stay where we are and we don't advance, we're not developing to the maximum potential that we have.
Definitely. I was reading this interesting book, and it was by the guy called Seth Godin. I don't know if you know who he is, but it was about when to quit, essentially. And there's something that's fascinating, and obviously, like a business owner, how do you determine if you are in a stage with the company or whatever you do? How do you determine if it's time to quit something or that you're just in a dip? Have you ever thought about that?
Sure. To me, it's less of when to quit and when to pivot. There's a difference, right? My answer when to quit is never. You never quit. I think if you persevere long enough and hard enough and you're focused in the right direction, you accomplish things. But sometimes the way you're approaching something or what you're doing isn't working. You need to do it differently. Or you need to change the goal. And for that, I think what's important is to understand, first of all, where are you going? Because as the saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, any direction will do. So you've got to have a clear vision of what are you trying to accomplish, whether it's long-term or short-term. And then you want to understand whether you're formally defining these things or not, what are the ways by which you will measure your progress? And if they're advancing, great. If they're ebbing and you're going into a dip, then you've got to figure out, are these structural deficiencies or are they more of the moment? And are they short term or long term? Are they fundamental or are they being temporarily affected by outside forces? And again, these are analysis fundamentals in your personal life or professional life. And then if you've set benchmarks or have a way to kind of look at a situation, then you can decide, is X greater than Y or is Y greater than X? And either that means continue doing what you're doing or don't. And then, you've got to go from there. But I think the worst thing you can do is not have a goal, not have an idea of how you're going to measure your progress towards that goal.
Yeah.
Not be critical and reflecting and measuring that progress. If you don't do those things, you're kind of just, using your gut and waving your finger in the air on so many levels, and that's the worst. So I would say whether you're going to continue on the same vein toward the goal, change your goal, change how you're approaching that goal. The key things are to know where you want to go, know how you're currently going there, and how are you measuring your progress. And as long as you have that, and then you can step back and look at them, then the decision of whether to, to Seth Godin's perspective, whether to quit or to advance, is becomes a more qualitative analysis. I'm sorry, more quantitative analysis, as opposed to something more qualitative that's based on how do I feel. Because, if I did everything based on only how I feel, my life would be very, very much more turbulent than it is.
Oh, that's such a good point, man. Yeah, because I do that. There's decisions I made based on how I feel, and you're very correct by saying, don't make decisions essentially on how you feel, especially if you have a business,
Yeah, and look, this is very much, I'd be the first to say this is not something I'm perfect at, right? I make decisions based on how I feel all the time, but doesn't mean that that's the best way to do things, right? It's hard to, we can't be perfect all the time. We can't be quantitative all the time. We're humans. We feel, we make decisions based on that. So it's very much an aspirational framework, as opposed to something that I'm saying I do this all the time and I'm perfect, because no one's perfect.
No. Exactly, man. It's super fascinating, to be honest, the whole everything. But last question. Do you have a favorite failure when it comes to maybe Ampere, maybe your personal life, whatever, that set you up for later success?
Yeah. Tons of failures. I often joke I can't wait to start another business one day, because I've made so many failures up to now that the next one's going to be, I have so many lessons that I've learned. I'll share two. One is more, again, philosophical, and one is very pointed. The philosophical one is, I think, to the point where I just said decision-making framework is key. I think for a long time I didn't really have that. I just kind of said, well, I'm looking very micro, and I'm going to do this step and then this step and this step, and we'll see. But there wasn't necessarily as much of a core structural framework to why was I doing this and what was I hoping to achieve and how did I do. I was just kind of living more day to day. When you start a company, you're forced very much to throw that out the window if you want to have any chance of success. Because if all you do is think of what's tomorrow, then good luck planning for next year. Secondly, I started an options trading company with a friend while I was in LA, and it was great for a handful of months, and it tanked for the next handful of months, and we ended up breaking even, more or less. But I recognized that just because I had no business background, by the way. Again, I said music and Italian. That was an insight where I said, look, if you want to do something, sometimes hard work and passion aren't enough. You got to have some set of fundamentals and knowledge of what you're doing. And so that was one of the key reasons why I wanted to go to business school, was to say, look, I love this idea of starting something, building a business, but I also know that I lack a lot of the kind of just the core fundamentals that I wish I knew. And for me, an effective way to accomplish that and to fill that hole, among other goals, was to go to grad school. And so by that company floundering, I don't even recall. I guess it was a company, but it wasn't a business for sure. It pushed me to realize that there was something that I had to get right on my fundamentals before I would be able to be successful in kind of my execution.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, failures are important, especially, the saying, you fail but fail forward, and that's what it sounds like. I mean, I've done that a lot of times, and yeah, it sounds like for you too.
Totally. I mean, one of our key values at Ampere is we say failure leads to success. And what I mean by that is I expect everyone to fail at everything they do once. I expect no one to fail at any task twice.
Right.
Because if we learn by failing, and the key is if you do something wrong and you fail, then we need to learn the lesson from that so that the next time we fail at something else. And eventually, if you fail enough times and you learn enough, then you succeed. But the key underpinning there is failure is a good thing as long as you learn from it.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as we learn from it, then eventually failure leads to success.
Yeah, well put. Very well put. But awesome, Drew. Thank you for taking your time. It's been fascinating to learn more about you, Ampere, books, philosophy, business, everything. It was cool. Maybe just before we wrap up, you can let the listeners know where they can find Ampere, more stuff about you, for example.
For sure, yeah. So amperemusic.com is where our main digital presence is. You can use Ampere Score for free online. We've got an API to integrate into content creation tools and distribution platforms if you're interested in kind of more scaled solutions. And then we've got a presence on kind of all the main social platforms from there. And then my email address, drew.silverstein@amperemusic.com. If you've got something you want to talk about, please reach out. And otherwise, thanks for having me. Awesome. And look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, man, definitely. Thank you, Drew. It was awesome having you here, and hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. A super interesting conversation, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, before you leave, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Apple Podcast, or Spotify, wherever you are listening or watching this show. It helps grow the channel and get more and more guests on. Also, if you want exclusive access to interviews before the public, join the audio tribe. Hit the link below to send your name and email address. You are on, and it's of course free. Love to see you there. But that's it for this week. Love to have you here as always, and I will see you next week again. So take care.